Be me, Kimberly. My life took a turn a little while back, maybe a year and a half ago. That was when the divorce from Mark was finalized. Looking back, the whole marriage felt like trying to swim upstream against a current of male toxicity. He wasn't a bad guy in the big ways, not really. He worked. He was quiet. But it was the little things, the constant grinding pressure of societal expectations he just couldn't see. The breaking point wasn't some huge fight. It was a toy truck. Our son, Leo, was about to turn 2. Mark came home one evening with a big, bright blue monster truck. He was so proud of himself, holding it up like he'd just discovered fire. He said something about how our little man would love it. Little man. The words just hung in the air. I tried to explain it to him calmly at first. I told him we shouldn't be forcing these aggressive, gendered stereotypes onto a child. Leo isn't a little man. Leo is a person. He should be free to discover his own identity without being shoved into the boy box from day one. Mark just stared at me. He didn't get it at all. He said it was just a truck, and I was overthinking things. Overthinking. That's what they always say when they don't want to engage with an idea that makes them uncomfortable. That night, I realized we were on 2 completely different planets. He was content to let our son be molded by the same old patterns that have been hurting people for centuries. I couldn't let that happen. So we split. It was for the best. It gave me the freedom I needed. I had a new purpose, to raise Leo correctly. I was going to create a space for him where he could grow up without the poison of gender roles. He would be my proof that masculinity wasn't innate. It was a cage, and I was going to give him the key. I even started a little blog about it, a way to document the journey, to show other progressive parents that it could be done. This was my chance to make a real difference, starting with my own child. They by Leo was going to be a masterpiece of enlightened parenting. First thing I did was purge the house. Anything that screamed boy had to go. The few blue onesies he had, gone. Replaced with soft, organic cotton in shades of beige, sage green, and muted yellow. I painted his room a calming off-white. The toys were the most important part. I did a lot of research. Everything was open-ended and designed to encourage creativity, not aggression. I bought beautiful, smooth wooden blocks in various geometric shapes. There were soft, faceless dolls made of natural fibers, perfect for nurturing empathy. Puzzles with abstract patterns, finger paints made from vegetables. It was a perfect, peaceful, non-gendered environment. I was so proud of it. I took pictures for the blog. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. "You're so brave," one said. "This is the future of parenting," wrote another. I felt validated. I was on the right path. But the project, it started showing some unexpected variables very early on. Leo was maybe 2.5 at this point. I remember one morning, I made him toast for breakfast. I cut it into a simple square, no crusts. I put it on his little plate and turned around to get his cup of water. When I turned back, he was holding the toast in a peculiar way. He nibbled away at it, carefully, until it was shaped like the letter L. He held it out in front of him, pointing it at the cat sleeping on a chair. Then he made a sound. Pew, pew. I just froze. Where did he even learn that? We don't watch TV with that kind of stuff. He'd never seen a weapon in his life. I gently took the toast from him. I tried to explain that we don't point things at people or animals, that pretending to hurt is the first step toward actual hurting. He just looked at me with his big, confused eyes and started to cry. I felt a little bad, but it was a necessary lesson. We had to nip these behaviors in the bud. Another time, a few weeks later, he was playing with his wooden blocks. I was so happy to see him engaging with them. I was hoping he'd build a tower, or maybe a little house. He picked up the longest rectangular block. He put it on the hardwood floor and started pushing it back and forth. And then came the noise. He was making engine noises. He was pretending the block was a car or a truck. I sat down with him and tried to redirect his play. I picked up some other blocks and said, "Look, Leo, let's build a community center where everyone can share." He just ignored me, completely absorbed in his vroom vroom block. I told him it wasn't a truck. It was just a shape, a rectangle. He stopped, looked at the block, looked at me, and then went right back to pushing it and making engine sounds, only a little quieter this time. It was frustrating. It felt like I was fighting against some invisible force. The park was another battleground. I always encouraged him to play on the swings or in the sandbox. I'd point out the little girls playing house and suggest he join them. He never wanted to. His eyes were always glued to the other side of the playground, the side where a loud, chaotic pack of little boys would be running around. They'd be chasing each other, wrestling in the wood chips, and hitting things with sticks. He would just stand there and watch them, completely mesmerized. One day, he picked up a fallen twig. He held it like it was a sword. He took a few clumsy swings at the air. I rushed over and took it from him. I told him that sticks were not for hitting. They were homes for ants. He didn't cry that time. He just got this stubborn look on his face. I wrote a long post on my blog that night about the pervasiveness of patriarchal imagery in public spaces. Even nature itself was being co-opted. The real trouble started with the weekend visitations. The court agreement said Mark got Leo every other weekend. I dreaded those days. I called them re-education weekends on my blog. Every time Mark came to pick him up, I would give him a detailed list of instructions. No gendered language. Call him my child, or Leo, not my son, or little man. Only offer him the pre-approved, open-ended toys I packed in his little canvas bag. No television shows with male protagonists who solve problems with violence. Mark would just stand there, nodding, with this blank expression. I could tell he wasn't taking any of it seriously. The first weekend was the worst. Leo came back, and he was different. He was more agitated, more hyper, and he was hiding something. That evening, while I was putting his clothes away, I found it. Shoved deep under his pillow was a bright red monster truck. It was hideous. Big black plastic tires, snarling face painted on the front. I felt a wave of cold fury. This was a deliberate act of sabotage. Mark was actively undermining everything I was trying to do. I went into the living room where Leo was arranging his wooden blocks. I held up the truck. "What is this?" His face lit up. "Brutus," he shouted. He named it. He gave the plastic symbol of toxic masculinity a name. I told him that this toy was not welcome in our house. I explained that it represented aggression and destruction, things we do not value. His little face crumpled. He started sobbing, reaching for the truck. I knew I had to be strong. This was a teachable moment. I walked into the kitchen, Leo trailing behind me, wailing. I opened the trash can and dropped it in. The plastic clatter it made was so final. He let out a scream that I'd never heard before. It was pure anguish. I hugged him and told him it was for his own good, that I was protecting him. Later that night, I called Mark. I was shaking with anger. I told him he had betrayed my trust and deliberately hurt our child's development. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said his dad had bought it for Leo, and that he'd never seen Leo so happy in his entire life. He told me, "Kim, he's a boy. Just let him be a boy." I hung up on him. He was a lost cause. He and his father were conspiring to infect my son with their outdated ideas. The weekends became a cycle. Leo would go to Mark's, come back with some new, forbidden knowledge. One time he came back humming the theme song to some superhero cartoon. Another time, he spent all of Sunday evening trying to tackle the sofa cushions. At my house, he grew quieter, more withdrawn. He would play with his blocks, but without any joy. He just stacked them and knocked them down over and over. He seemed to be living for those weekends with his father. When Sunday evening came, he would start to cry, clinging to Mark's leg, begging not to go. It was heartbreaking, but I told myself it was a necessary struggle. Decolonizing his mind was never going to be easy. His preschool teacher called me in for a meeting sometime in the spring. She was a nice woman, but a bit traditional. She said she was concerned about Leo. She mentioned he wasn't really socializing with the other children, boys or girls. He mostly kept to himself during free play. The only time he really seemed engaged, she said, was during story time if the book had a dragon or a knight in it, or when he would stand by the window and watch the construction workers building a new wing on the school. He would just stand there, silent, for 20 minutes straight, watching the excavators and cranes. I tried to explain my parenting philosophy to her. I told her about our gender-neutral home environment and our focus on non-aggressive play. I explained that what she saw as a lack of socialization was actually Leo learning to exist peacefully, without performing the aggressive rituals other boys were taught. She just nodded, but she had this look on her face, a kind of pitying, confused look. It was the same look Mark used to give me. It made me feel so isolated. Nobody understood what I was trying to achieve. My best friend, Martha, was my only real support system. She was on the same page as me about most things. We'd been to protests together. We were in the same feminist reading group. She was always supportive of my project with Leo, at least at first. She would come over for coffee, and I would vent about Mark's latest patriarchal intrusion. She would nod and agree, saying I was doing important work. But lately, I'd started to notice a shift in her. She didn't seem as enthusiastic. When I told her about the monster truck incident, she got a strange look on her face. She asked if maybe throwing it away in front of him was a little harsh. I was shocked. "Whose side are you on, Martha?" She backed down immediately, saying she was just playing devil's advocate. But the seed of doubt was planted. Was she starting to go soft, too? I decided I needed to prove to her and to everyone else that my methods were working. Our reading group was meeting at my house next month. It was the perfect opportunity. I would show them Leo, not just as my child, but as the living embodiment of our ideals. A child raised outside the gender binary, a gentle, empathetic soul who had no concept of male aggression. He would be the centerpiece of the evening, my validation. The weeks leading up to the meeting were intense. I doubled down on my efforts. I tried to engage Leo in what I called nurturing play. We would give his formless dolls little baths and wrap them in soft blankets. He would do it, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd just go through the motions. As soon as my attention wandered, I'd find him under the table, making quiet vroom noises with a piece of toast he'd saved from breakfast. The weekend before the meeting, it was Mark's turn to have him. I almost called and canceled. I was so afraid of what new damage he would come back with, but I knew Mark would fight it, and I didn't have the energy for another argument. So I let him go. I gave Mark the sternest lecture yet. This is a very important week for Leo's development. Do not expose him to any aggressive media or stereotypical male role models. Mark just gave me that same old placid nod and drove away with my son in the back seat. Leo came back on Sunday evening, and he seemed different again. He wasn't hyper this time. He was quiet, but in a focused, intense way. He had a new way of walking, a kind of strut. He kept squinting his eyes and talking in a low voice. I asked him what he did with his father. He just said, "We watched movies." I had a very bad feeling about it. But there was no time to dwell on it. The reading group was in 2 days. I spent the next day prepping Leo. I picked out his outfit, a lovely, hand-sewn beige linen jumpsuit, very minimalist and chic. I coached him on what to do when my friends arrived. He should sit quietly and play with his blocks. He could show them the community center he was supposed to be building. He just stared at me, his head tilted. I was nervous, but I was also excited. This was it. This was the night I would finally be understood. The night everyone would see that I was right all along. The evening of the reading group arrived. I was a bundle of nerves. I cleaned the house twice. I arranged and rearranged the organic, gluten-free snacks. Everything had to be perfect. My friends started to show up around 7. There was Martha, of course, and a few others from our circle. All smart, engaged women who I knew would appreciate what I was doing. Leo was in his room, playing quietly with his blocks as instructed. We settled in the living room with our tea. The conversation started with the book we were supposed to be discussing, something about deconstructing female archetypes in media. It was good, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept steering the conversation back to real-world applications, to parenting, to Leo. I talked about the challenges and rewards of raising a child completely free from the toxic sludge of gender norms. They all nodded along, looking impressed. "It's revolutionary, Kimberly," one of them said. This was my moment. "I'll show you," I said, getting up. "Leo, can you come out here for a minute, sweetie?" He walked into the room, looking very small in his beige jumpsuit. He stood there, blinking in the light, clutching a single wooden cube in his hand. I put my arm around his shoulders and presented him to the group. "This is Leo," I announced, my voice full of pride. "This is a child who has never been told to man up. He has never been taught that aggression is a solution. He is proof that when you remove the patriarchal programming, what's left is pure, gentle humanity." Everyone was smiling, looking at him like he was a little marvel. My heart swelled. They were seeing it. They were finally seeing it. And then Leo's eyes drifted to the small table next to the sofa. On the table was a vase with a bouquet of long-stemmed roses that Martha had brought. Something shifted in his expression. His eyes, which had been dull and compliant, suddenly lit up with an intense, focused light. He let go of my hand and walked slowly toward the table. I thought he was going to smell the flowers. I started to say something like, "Look, he's appreciating nature's beauty without the need to possess it." He didn't smell them. He reached into the vase and pulled out 2 of the thickest stemmed roses. Water dripped onto the floor. Before I could react, his little fingers went to work. With a surprising deftness, he tore the red petals and leaves off the stems, dropping them onto the carpet. He was left holding 2 long, green, thorny sticks, 2 swords. He took a step back, weighed them in his hands, and a grin spread across his face. It was a grin I'd never seen before. It was fierce and wild. Then, in a flash of movement, he scrambled onto the coffee table, scattering our books and teacups. He stood there, feet planted wide, and held one of the stems triumphantly in the air. "For honor!" he yelled in a surprisingly deep voice. And then the battle began. He was no longer in my living room. He was on some medieval battlefield in his head. He lunged, he parried, he ducked, and he weaved, fighting an invisible army. He made noises with his mouth, clang, swoosh, grrr, as he hacked and slashed at the air. My friends and I sat there, frozen, teacups halfway to our mouths. He leaped off the coffee table, did a clumsy somersault on the rug, and came up in a crouch. He charged the sofa, letting out a final guttural war cry, and plunged his rose-stemmed sword deep into one of my decorative throw pillows. He stood there for a moment, panting heavily, the victorious warrior over his slain foe. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Leo looked up, his chest still heaving, a triumphant smile on his face, as if expecting applause. He looked at the stunned faces of my friends, then at me. My face must have been a mask of pure horror. His smile faltered. One of the women, I think it was Sarah, cleared her throat. "Wow, it's getting late," she said, her voice strained. "I should probably be going." That broke the spell. Suddenly, everyone had to leave. They all mumbled excuses about early mornings and long drives. They grabbed their coats and purses, avoiding my eyes. Martha was the last to leave. She paused at the door and looked from the carnage of petals and thorns on my floor to the vanquished pillow, to Leo, who was now standing quietly in the corner, and finally to me. She didn't look angry. She looked sad. It was a look of profound pity. She just shook her head slightly and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. I was left alone in the wreckage of my perfect evening, with my perfect gender-neutral child who had just single-handedly dismantled my entire worldview with a couple of flowers. The days that followed were a blur of shame and confusion. My phone, usually buzzing with messages from the group chat, was silent. I had been excommunicated. I tried texting Martha a few times, asking if she wanted to get coffee and talk. My messages were left on read. Finally, after a week of silence, she called me. I was so relieved, I started trying to explain, to rationalize what had happened. I said Leo must have picked it up from somewhere, that it was a last gasp of the patriarchal programming we were fighting. Martha cut me off. Her voice was gentle but firm. She told me she couldn't support what I was doing anymore. She said that watching Leo that night was like watching a little prisoner finally break free. She told me that I wasn't raising a child, I was conducting an experiment, and the subject of my experiment was miserable. "He's a little boy, Kim," she said. "He's not a blog post. He's a person." I felt the blood drain from my face. She, my best friend, was using the exact same language as Mark. I accused her of being brainwashed, of internalizing the patriarchy. She just sighed and said she was sorry, and then she hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. At the same time, my online world was collapsing. Someone from the reading group must have talked. An anonymous post appeared on a popular parenting forum describing a delusional mother who was torturing her son with a bizarre gender experiment, and the story of the Rose Sword Rebellion. It didn't mention my name, but the details were so specific. Someone figured it out and linked to my blog. The floodgates opened. My comments section, once a haven of support, turned into a torrent of hate. I was called a monster, an abuser, a narcissist. My follower count plummeted. I shut the blog down, but the damage was done. My safe space, my community, my validation, it was all gone. I was completely and utterly alone. And at home, things got worse. Leo became even more withdrawn around me. He knew he had done something wrong that night, even if he didn't understand what. The light I'd seen in his eyes during his battle was gone again, replaced by a sullen, watchful obedience. He was just waiting for the weekend. The day Mark came to pick him up, Leo ran to him and clung to his legs like he was being rescued from a burning building. He didn't even look back at me. The final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later. I got a call from Mark. His voice was cold, businesslike. He told me he had been contacted by Leo's preschool teacher. She had apparently been keeping a log of her concerns. She told Mark that Leo was showing signs of emotional distress, that he was lethargic and unhappy at school, and that he only ever talked about his dad and his grandpa. She told him she had a professional obligation to report her concerns if things didn't change. Mark informed me he was filing a petition with the court to amend our custody agreement. He was seeking primary physical custody. I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. The courts were always on the mother's side. Everyone knew that. He didn't have a chance. Oh, how wrong I was. In the courtroom, My own words were used as a weapon against me. Mark's lawyer had printed out my entire blog, every post, every smug declaration about deconstructing my son. She read excerpts aloud, my post about the bread pistol, my post about the patriarchal monster truck, including the part where I proudly threw it in the trash in front of my crying toddler, my post about the futility of redirecting Leo from vroom vroom noises. To a neutral observer, stripped of their ideological context, my words didn't sound progressive. They sounded cruel, unhinged. The teacher testified. She spoke calmly about Leo's sadness, his isolation, his desperation for his father. Mark testified. He didn't yell or accuse. He just spoke about wanting his son to be happy. He talked about playing catch in the yard and letting Leo get dirty. He talked about reading him stories about heroes and adventures. It all sounded so simple, so normal. The judge, a woman I had assumed would be my ally, looked at me with cold, disapproving eyes. She said my home environment was a rigid, ideological bubble that was causing my son significant emotional harm. The ruling was swift. Mark was granted primary custody. I was given the same visitation schedule he used to have, every other weekend. I stumbled out of the courthouse in a daze. The patriarchy had won. It had taken my son. That was almost a year ago. Life is very different now. I see Leo on my weekends. He arrives in clothes I didn't pick out, jeans with holes in the knees, T-shirts with superheroes or dinosaurs on them. His hair is always messy. He's loud now. He runs instead of walks. He talks constantly about his friends at school, about the Little League team he just joined, about some video game his dad lets him play. He is happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. It's a happiness that feels completely alien to me. Last weekend, I had to pick him up from Mark's house because Mark's car was in the shop. I'd never been to his new place. It was a small, simple house with a big backyard. When I pulled up, I saw them in the yard. Leo, Mark, and Mark's father. They were kicking a soccer ball around. Leo tripped and fell, scraping his knee on a rock. I tensed up, expecting a flood of tears. But he just got back up, wiped the dirt on his jeans, and yelled, "I'm okay," before running back into the game. Mark's dad clapped him on the shoulder and said something that made him laugh. I sat in my car for a minute, just watching this happy, vibrant, perfectly ordinary little boy. A boy I had tried so hard to erase. Mark saw my car and walked over. He wasn't gloating. He just looked tired, but content. He leaned on the window and looked back at his son. "You know," he said, his voice quiet. For a while there, I was so scared. I felt like I was losing him. He shook his head, a small smile on his face. You tried so hard to raise a they, but all he ever wanted was just to be a him. He went to get Leo's bag. I just sat there, the engine idling as his words echoed in the silence. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't have an answer.